Good afternoon from Washington. My name is Matthew Goodman. I'm Senior Vice President here at CSIS and delighted to welcome you today to this virtual conversation with Michael Schiffer, Assistant Administrator of USAID, who I'll introduce in just a second. This is part of a series of conversations that the CSIS Economics Program does with senior policymakers involved in issues at the intersection of economics and national security. Delighted to have Michael with us.
And hi, everyone. My name is Erin Murphy. I'm the Deputy Director and Senior Fellow for the Economics Program. So we'll be asking a few questions for our participant, Michael Schiffer, but we're also going to open it up to folks online. The way that you can submit a question is hitting the button below the CSIS video on the CSIS webpage.
So, as mentioned, this afternoon, we're delighted to be joined by Michael Schiffer, who is Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, responsible for the Bureau for Asia, which is a large geography, as you'll find out in a minute here. Assistant Secretary Schiffer was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in by administrative power on October 3rd, 2022. Previously, he was a senior advisor and counselor on the Democratic staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He served at the Department of Defense as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asia, and he also has held a number of other positions on the Hill and in our community, the think tank community. So we're delighted to have Michael with us today. He's going to talk about his role and the Indo-Pacific strategy, his recent trip to the region. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Matt. Good to be here.
Nice to be here. So we're going to get started, and Erin and I are going to sort of ping pong questions at you. I'm sure you'll be able to handle them, no problem.
We'll find out.
We'll find out. So one of the Biden administration's key regional initiatives is the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, which was...
Can I contest the so-called part?
Okay, the Indo-Pacific strategy, which was released a little over a year ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about that strategy and about USAID's role in the strategy and your own role, or your Bureau's role in that?
Sure, and really appreciate the question. You know, we just had the first birthday, I think it was, for the actual Biden-Harris Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's something that's gotten a lot of focus and attention across the entire government over the past year. You know, look, I think sort of telescoping back a little bit, you know, there's no question that sort of Russia's illegal further invasion of Ukraine is the urgent question on the agenda when it comes to the international peace and security, the challenges that we face from authoritarian governments. But you know, as both of you know from your time in government, it's a constant balance between the urgent and the important. And I don't think there's any question when you think about what is the important theater as we contemplate our new era of strategic competition for the United States for the balance of the 21st century, and it's Asia. It's the Indo-Pacific. You know, pick your metric. You know, the world's most dynamic economies, majority of the world's population, where some of the most urgent and immediate threats from climate change are felt, engine room for global pandemics, right? You can go down the list. I mean, Asia is where the balance of our history, of our security and our prosperity is going to be driven and felt for the balance of this century. So the Biden-Harris administration, building on the work of previous administrations in laying out the Indo-Pacific strategy, has made what I think, and I guess I'm paid to think this, so take it for what it's worth. You know, a very, very clear and cogent statement about our enduring commitment to the region and our absolute commitment to our partners and allies to work with them to build a free and open architecture for Asia, one that is transparent and inclusive, that undergirds peace and security, and that helps to enable economic growth and shared prosperity for all. You know, bringing it back to USAID, you know, I guess I would offer that in order to make the strategy work, what we have got to be able to do for the region is to put forward our value proposition and make clear what we can offer to the region. You know, when we talk about wanting to present our partners and allies and friends and future friends in the region with choices and alternatives, that's got to be real and concrete and tangible. And the place where that is most in need, and I know that you tend to share these views, is not so much on the security side of the house, right? I think there's no question that Indo-Pacific Command can fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. It's on forging our shared economic future and creating the ecosystem for the region that will allow us all to grow our economies and prosper together. And so the work that we're doing supporting our colleagues at the Department of Commerce and USTR on IPEF, on
the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
It's all right. It's a
bad habit here at CSIS to speak in acronyms. It's a bad habit that I have to speak in acronyms, so I apologize for that.
The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Lost your chain of thought.
No, I'm not sure I had a chain of thought. So with the support that we provide for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as we look at things like workforce development and upskilling and how do we help to create secure supply chains, that's a big piece of the puzzle. The technical assistance that we provide on the front end of the pipeline as we look to work with others in the U.S. government, like the Department of Commerce again, Development Finance Corporation, and Department of State to put together bankable deals so that we do the technical assistance at the front end. DFC and others will come in, with capital in the middle, and then we can, help to drive sustainable development. That's another piece of it. We do a lot of governance work that is critical to creating the sort of legal and governance structures that allow for private investment to come in to countries and allow for investments to thrive, right? If you don't have legal frameworks that allow for investments to drive development, you're not going to get investments. If you don't have governance that have good, sound procurement policies, if you don't have transparent financial systems, you get all sorts of challenges, again, as you all know better than I do. And so all of those pieces of the puzzle, and there are more that we can talk about, represent the sorts of things that we're able to bring to the table with our development work, in addition to being able to support infrastructure, health, education, other vital development goals that can help make the Indo-Pacific strategy real, tangible, and concrete for our partners, for our friends in the region, in places they live, and in ways that speak to their goals, their aspirations, and how they see their development pathways. So I think it's making sure that we get our side of the puzzle right, along with reaching out across the entire interagency for a whole of government approach, and making that work. I mean, that is one of the critical tasks that we have in front of us.
Right. And we're going to dive into a couple of those issues, including the sort of sub-regional dimension of this large footprint that you cover. But let me just ask about the sort of what the partners want from this strategy. I mean, what would they think the U.S. is really doing something that is different and that is really strategic from their perspective when you travel in the region? What are they saying they want from the U.S.? They seem to want our military, though they don't want to say that quite as openly in a lot of cases, but they like it for the sort of peace and stability it provides. But in this other area that has to complement that, what do they think is a strategic thing for the United States to be doing?
I think there are a number of things. I mean, first off, they want predictability from the United States. After a number of years, and we can debate and discuss whether it's sort of fair or unfair, but after a number of years of perceived, episodic attention or inattention and underinvestment, they want signs that the United States is, with predictability, committed to and engaged in the region, and not just on the military and security side of the house, but across the across the full spectrum of our partners' interests. Secondly, they want to be able to understand and appreciate, in the face of arguments that are being made by others, primarily by Beijing, that we have a model that will deliver prosperity and growth for them, right? And it's incumbent upon us to be able to make that argument that democracy delivers, and that if you're looking for genuine, sustainable development outcomes, that the sorts of good governance, anti-corruption, transparency measures that we advocate for, vibrant civil societies, that those are in fact the critical enablers that allow for sustainable development to happen. Thirdly, it is, and particularly in the Pacific Island countries, climate change, climate change, climate change. Whether it's on the adaptation and resilience side of the agenda, which is obviously vital both for the Pacific Islands, but also low-lying areas in Southeast Asia, or on the energy transformation side, right? Whereas we try to figure out how to all get on a pathway to net zero, there is a lot of both technical and financial work and assistance that is required. And lastly, there is an interest, and this is related to climate change, in transformative infrastructure projects. There are a lot of development needs in these countries, as you all know. And we've got to be there, and this again speaks to being an actual alternative. We've got to be there helping them figure out how they develop, right? It's if your choice is between not having a road or having a road that's built with opaque financing and Chinese labor and maybe bad quality, you're going to take that bad road, because no road is not an option, right? Same for hydroelectric dams, same for energy grids that would support electric vehicles. I mean, you can sort of go down the list. We have a different model than the Chinese state-centered model for how we look to drive these sorts of investments. We're relying on the private sector. There's got to be a market basis and economic logic to the investment, right? Not money that's flowing for strategic but not necessarily economic purposes. But all of that requires active U.S. government engagement and active USAID engagement to enable.
Great. Well, a lot there. Erin, do you want to follow up on
Sure.
some?
Well, speaking of active U.S. engagement, you just joined an interagency mission to the Pacific Islands. So I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about your trip and what some of the U.S. goals are for the Pacific Islands.
Yeah, no, it was a terrific trip that included the National Security Council, the State Department, the Coast Guard, and USAID. And we visited. Well, first we met up and started in New Zealand, and then went to Papua New Guinea, to the Solomons, Vanuatu, and Fiji, both for bilateral meetings and also to meet with the Pacific Island Forum. A lot of really good conversations at senior levels, across the region. Climate change, as I said before, that was front and center for all the obvious reasons for our Pacific Island friends, every place that we went. As was, back to the point about endurance and commitment and predictability, as were questions about, you were here, then you were less here. Can we count on you this time to be coming back? So lots of conversations to try to convince and make the arguments about how we are committed. This is going to be enduring, but of course it's now on us to prove that that's going to be the case. And I think we're doing that both with the State Department stepping up its presence, with the USAID stepping up its presence and engagement over the next couple of years, including opening a full mission in Fiji this September. That's what we're aiming for. But also critically taking the steps that are necessary to get the Peace Corps back on the ground across the Pacific. I mean, the Peace Corps are some of our best examples and most inspiring examples of what the United States can offer the region as a genuine partner and as a genuine friend in helping people in the region with their needs, where they are, where they live, both literally and metaphorically. So that was a critical part of the conversation. The Coast Guard was part of the trip because there is a lot of work that needs to be done for our Pacific Island friends, but across the region on maritime domain awareness, but also illegal and underreported fishing. And there are, again, as you think about what a whole of government effort looks like, there are connections to be made. If we're working as we are in Fiji, in the Solomons, and in Papua New Guinea on sustainable aquaculture and conservation areas, but then 90% of the take is taken illegally, right? That's not great for conservation of fish livestock. It's not great for economic development for the countries themselves, because the illegal take is not, from the Pacific Island countries. It's mostly from China. There are others as well. So getting the peanut butter of our work for sustainable aquaculture together with the chocolate of the Coast Guard's ability to be able to help do shipwrighter programs and provide training and support for the countries to develop their maritime capabilities. That's the way in which we can sort of knit this together in ways that are beneficial all around.
So I think you offer a lot of concrete examples as to what the U.S. is doing to prove that there is some longevity and endurance to this relationship. But what do you say to those that may see the Pacific Islands more as a pawn in a great strategic game? How could you convince the Pacific Islands that U.S. interest is not just to compete with China or other big players, nefarious players in the region, that it's more about the Pacific Islands themselves?
Well, look, I mean, first I would point to the history. We have been a Pacific country since the very founding of our republic, or arguably earlier than that. Our interest in the Pacific didn't just start in 1949. It long predates that. And the interest is driven not just by geostrategic considerations, but by a genuine desire to work with our friends in the region in our mutual interest, to build the architecture of a region that serves their interests, meets their values, and serves our values and interests as well. We have large, thriving Pacific Island communities in the United States. Our destinies have been, are, and will be entwined for decades to come. So I think that's the first part. The second part is, again, we need to be there and taking steps that demonstrate our value proposition, not what we're against, right? This is not about cursing the darkness. This is about lighting the candle. And this is about offering the value that we believe our model for governance and our model for economic development can provide, and doing it with them as partners, right? I would underscore the word with. If we were typing, I would put it in italics and give it an underline. Right? This is not something we're doing to or at or on the Pacific. It's something we're doing with, with our partners, and consonant with the Pacific Way. And that's, frankly, part of the reason why increasing our presence and engagement in the region is so critical. These are countries, rightly so, that place high value on relationships. And if you're not there, it's hard to have a relationship. And so, we've got to make sure that we are in the region and working on their issues and their priorities in ways that respond to their needs. And I think if we can do that, that goes a long way towards providing the assurance that this is not about moving chess pieces around in some geostrategic chessboard. This is about our interests in working with them to develop a region that is beneficial for all of us.
The United States is not In the region alone, we have actually we have 5 treaty allies in the region, 3 of which are advanced countries, Japan, Korea, and Australia, who also participate in the kinds of activities that you do at USAID. So, and we have a lot of different initiatives bilaterally with those countries through the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Initiative that the US, Australia, India, Japan are part of, which does some of this work, the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, the Partnership for Infrastructure and Investment. There are a number of initiatives in which we're working with our advanced country partners in the region on these initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about that coordination with those partners? How do we work with them?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. We have really, I think, stepped up our efforts over the past couple of years to engage in meaningful ways with our partners to see what together we can provide by way of public goods for Asia and for the Indo-Pacific. And that includes, obviously starting with treaty allies like Japan and Korea and Australia, but it also includes our European friends. As I said, we started this Pacific Island trip in New Zealand because New Zealand has, particularly for the Pacific, a lot to offer as a partner. We signed an MOU this past November with Taiwan because we see Taiwan as being able to play a role again in providing public goods for the region. And so we're working through a number of different bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, plurilateral mechanisms, both formal and informal, to try to see how we can better coordinate our efforts where we have complementary strengths, skills, and advantages that we can offer. And to do so in ways that our partners in the region will be responding to. We had a long conversation, for example, at the Pacific Island Forum about the Partners for the Blue Pacific and what the Partners for the Blue Pacific might be able to do working with the PIF to be able to provide for additional environmental and economic development, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, infrastructure, again, not at the region, but with the region. So there's been a really rich discourse with all of our partners. And look, not to sound like a broken record, but we're looking to build regional architecture that is beneficial for everyone, and that's first and foremost everyone in the Indo-Pacific and Asia. But given the centrality of Asia for global developments, right, that we think there are global interests at play here. And if we're going to get that architecture, right, functional problem-solving architecture down right, it's going to require support and sustenance, not just from the United States, but from other partners that have an interest in international law, international institutions, norms of behavior. And it's going to require that, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because, frankly, in a world of finite resources, we may have the will, but we're not necessarily going to have the wallet alone. But working with partners, we can create the financing that is needed. We have skills in some areas, but we don't necessarily have skills in every area, right? There are things, frankly, that the Japanese, the Koreans, the Australians do better than us. There are things we do better than them. But so we've got to map all that out so that we're able to each work to our own best advantage and do it in a coordinated way.
And that, because although all that makes sense, and we are obviously aligned in our broad interests and our values and our sort of broad approaches, but each of those countries, Japan, Korea, others, have their own specific, objectives or priorities and even ways of doing business. I mean, just for example, Japan's Bank for International Cooperation, great partner, I'm sure that you would say, and does a lot of great work. But their mission is to promote ultimately Japanese business and prosperity interests, which is not a problem, but it's a slightly different mission from yours and other American institutions. So there must be challenges of trying to get our approaches aligned in some ways, and how do we give us examples of where that is a little challenging, where we try to overcome that, and how do we do that?
Yeah, look, I mean, there is going to be, at least for certain undertakings, there is going to be some tension, right? At the end of the day, USAID, we are committed to the development outcomes for our partners, but we're also part of the US government, and we're committed to development outcomes for our own country as well. And we want to be doing things that will help to create jobs here in the United States, right? And just as JBIC, our Japanese friends, are going to be wanting to do things that will be creating jobs in Japan. That tension is going to be there, at least on certain things. But getting back to sort of the idea of this mapping exercise, there are also areas where, frankly, the economic logic of some of the relationships also suggests complementarity, right? We, the United States, are not necessarily the natural market for small, developing island states in the Pacific because of the tyranny of distance, the way supply chains work, a number of reasons. But if we can contribute to creating bankable projects and contribute to mobilizing finance that then allows for a going development project in, pick the Pacific Island country of your choice, where the outflows are going to markets in Australia or New Zealand, that can actually be beneficial all around. And as there is increased prosperity across the region, we hope, that will have other benefits for the American economy. It's not necessarily a direct line, but I think there are complementarities there.
Right. But before I hand back to Erin, let me say first to the audience, we've got some good questions coming in, but we welcome more questions, so feel free to submit them with the button on your screen. And the other thing I'll say is, because we've been talking a lot about the Pacific Islands, which is an important part of your geography, but you also cover Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, so you have a big portfolio, and some of these things presumably apply, at least in the sort of the approach, the methodology, the objectives, the tools, with differences. Just to stress that for our audience who may think Michael only works on this small area of the Pacific Islands. There's a huge thing. Okay, Erin, back to you.
It's about an entire hemisphere. It's kind of your portfolio there.
Yeah, it is a big chunk of the world.
So we've just talked about working with partners and allies, but perhaps even more challenging is working within the U.S. government itself. So,
why would you ever say that?
Well, not in my experience, but I mean, you already demonstrated on your trip to the Pacific Islands, the various government agencies that were there. Picking up on the infrastructure needs that you were discussing, how can USAID work with the interagency as trying to address those needs? And again, in your hemisphere of the world.
And if you use any agency name the first time, please spell out the acronym because.
Okay. Fair enough. Look, I think there is, just as I was talking earlier about this external mapping exercise, there is also an internal mapping exercise for the U.S. government that I would say, based upon my experience so far, and I've only been in my job now for 6 months, there's still some terra incognita. There's still some areas where we as an interagency are not fully lashed together. But we are actually undertaking a couple of lines of effort to create a laydown so that we can see, where does USAID have tools to provide technical assistance that the Department of Commerce or Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture, the Interior Department, when we talk about the compact states, don't have tools. Where does USAID, I'll talk about ourselves again, where do we line up with some of the efforts of the Department of State or the Development Finance Corporation are undertaking? so that we can figure out, who has the best set of tools to apply to a given, a given problem, and then how to assure that we have follow through across the interagency as projects are developed, as problems are dealt with that may require being unpassed from one part of the government to another part of the government. It's challenging. There is, in the U.S. government, as in all parts of life, right, there are people and institutions that are turfy, there are others that are more open. It can be a real slog when you're talking about getting dozens of people from dozens of institutions that have different mandates and have different congressional oversight committees with different ideas in mind, all around the table sharing information. But I actually think we're making a fair amount of progress in doing so.
Well, USAID occupies a unique role also with the Development Finance Corporation, which is or has been seen as a silver bullet to all of the world's infrastructure problems, that we're going to use the DFC to help finance and really compete with Belt and Road and other strategic competitive related initiatives. USAID has a seat on the board for the DFC and can help approve projects. But DFC has an interesting mandate in that it has to support private sector-led, commercially viable projects, but also fulfill a national security and foreign policy, highly developmental role. How does USAID, or how does your bureau work, especially with the Indo-Pacific work, in helping shape and find those transactions that support the highly developmental part of that mandate, as well as being commercially viable in foreign policy?
Well, look, I mean, I guess I would start by sort of stepping back and offering that, from our perspective, sustainable development has to be able to go on itself, on its, on a market logic, right? This is, to use the cliche, right? This is about, teaching somebody how to fish, not buying them a fish, not, and so, if there's not a way to do that in a way that is sustainable and has a market driver so that, if and when we step away, it can continue to go by itself, that's not real development. And I would offer, on the side that, one of the things that we have discovered about a number of the development projects that the PRC has undertaken, and there's a great aid data set that's been developed by William and Mary, is that, by and large, there is sort of a 5 or 6 year sugar rush in which, GDP gets goosed, and then the projects and the return for the economy and the development effects fall off, right? We're not interested in goosing somebody's economy for 5 years. We're interested in the next 50 years, right? And that requires a different model, right? And the model that we advocate for. So I don't think these two things are oppositional. I think where we can add value and where we do try to add value for the Development Finance Corporation as we work with them is helping them to focus on areas where the economic need and the diplomatic, political, and geostrategic sort of all come together. And frankly, there is no shortage where all of those streams come together. And then again, there are things that we can do on the front end of projects by way of technical assistance that then helps partners to create bankable projects, or that brings together public and private partners in a way that the DFC is then able to finance and take forward. So I think there's a lot of value add there.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more that we could take on here, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. We've got some good questions coming in, and I'm going to start with the first one that I think is kind of interesting, teeing off. I think it's against the backdrop of the couple of references you made to our competition with China, or you didn't have to make those references because in this town, that's what everyone's talking about is competition with China. But the question here is, are there some joint U.S. PRC, People's Republic of China, humanitarian projects we could work on to help keep our channels of communication and cooperation going between our two countries? I mean, humanitarian or otherwise, is there anything we might be able to do, with China in this space that isn't confrontational?
Look, I think the honest answer is that it's difficult to imagine what that might be right now, in part because Beijing is not talking to or engaging with us, not for lack of effort on the part of the U.S. government, but because of the choices that Beijing is making. And also because, frankly, many of the issues that we have that have led to, what is sort of characterized, I think accurately so, as strategic competition, are a result of China's, Beijing's behavior. Right? These are not choices that we made or a relationship that we wanted, but they are a function of the way in which Beijing has chosen to behave both at home and abroad. If that behavior changes, then that opens up a number of possibilities. But until that behavior changes, it's hard to imagine areas where there may be opportunities for the sort of cooperation that I think the question was trying to get at.
So one of the questions focuses on Afghanistan, and as if your portfolio wasn't complex enough. Can you discuss a little bit about USAID's work in Afghanistan? Will it continue? How can it continue when you have the Taliban in charge in the government? Are there spaces to work, whether it's local private sector, or does this mean that the Asia Bureau's focuses and resources may shift elsewhere?
We have an absolute moral commitment and an ironclad policy commitment to the Afghan people, and that exists, and that is going to continue. We have provided close to $1 billion last year to Afghanistan for humanitarian assistance to meet the needs of the Afghan people. We're trying to navigate through a really tough set of questions right now, given some of the edicts that have come down from Kandahar about the role of women and girls in Afghan society, in the Afghan workforce, women and girls' access to education and the like. And we have to adhere to a first do no harm humanitarian principle, and that can make it tricky. But our commitment is there, and we are going to continue to seek to try to find ways to provide humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan.
There's you mentioned women and girls, and there's a separate question here. What are the Bureau's plans related to advancing gender equality, women's rights, inclusion across the region, so across your entire footprint there in the next couple of years?
We have at USAID a gender strategy that we believe has to be baked into all of our work. There are obviously particular gender issues in certain countries, related to trafficking in persons, sexual harassment, or worse, that we have to address as development issues. But then, as we think about more broadly, what inclusive development looks like, and what sustainable development looks like, it's impossible to imagine, and this speaks to some of the challenges in Afghanistan now as well. Sustainable development, if you leave 50% or more of your population on the sidelines, isn't very sustainable. And so we have to make sure that women are bought into the process at every stage of the game, provided educational access and opportunities, provided business access and opportunities, so that we have development programs that work and that, as I said, are sustainable over time.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. There are a couple more there.
Yes, they've been coming in, so thank you, audience, for all of your questions. I'm going to pick up on the Peace Corps question that we have in Fulbright. You mentioned that earlier as being, one of the premier programs that can establish those people-to-people connections. So how do you see government programs like that, whether it's, and also some of the exchange programs that State Department has, but other bureaus and agencies do as well? How can this help with your strategy in the Pacific Islands, in Southeast Asia, and elsewhere?
Well, when we were in, Vanuatu 2 weeks ago, one of our senior government interlocutors commented in the meeting that, he goes out to some of the outer islands and he runs across Peace Corps volunteers that have stayed there, speak dialects that he doesn't speak, and he wonders, who's the real Vanuatuan here? Is it me, or is it this American Peace Corps volunteer that's now out there and fully integrated into society, and a contributing member of Vanuatu's society and economy. So I think those sorts of engagements, whether they're the Peace Corps volunteer who stays for the rest of his, her, their life, whether it's the International Visitors Leadership Program, the exchanges that the State Department does, I think the relationships that those sorts of programs create, and the equities that then flow over into all of our other diplomatic and development diplomacy is incalculable. I mean, that's not why we do it. It's not an instrumental transaction, but those benefits are undeniable. And for us as a government, not to recognize that and to want to seek to double down on those programs, both for their immediate benefits, but also for those other equities, would be short-sighted in the extreme.
I think maybe we could squeeze one more in, and then we'll make sure I don't
really
ask
quick.
another one beyond that. So if you could roll up a little bit to that first question, because I think it's an interesting one, which is about it's about Vanuatu, but it's a sort of broader question about what does the map of the Pacific look like right now in terms of countries that have and don't have an embassy. Is there a plan to expand the diplomatic presence beyond Vanuatu? What benefits, I think this is the core of the question, does an embassy provide in development diplomacy that, places that don't have an embassy can't do, or can you do your work with or without an embassy?
Yeah, look, I obviously don't want to get too far ahead of where we are in sort of laying out our plans for how we're going to be stepping up both the State Department, USAID, and others across the Pacific. The State Department just announced on Friday, reopening the embassy in Vanuatu. That was one of the outcomes of the discussions of our trip a couple of weeks ago. As I mentioned earlier, later this year we're going to be opening a full mission in Fiji and a country representative office in Papua New Guinea, and then have plans to add an additional 50, close to 50 people across the Pacific over the next couple of years. Look, I would offer, and again, without having people on the ground, without the relationships, without being able to sit and listen and understand, what the needs are of our partners, it's really hard to do, whether it's diplomacy or development diplomacy, or frankly, military diplomacy. It's really hard to do it right. You can't do it from 7,000 miles away. You can't do it through a computer screen. You can't do it, as valuable as the trip was that we had a couple of weeks ago. You can't do it showing up once or twice a year. And frankly, that's also not what friendship looks like, right? I mean, friendship is being there with your friends, with your partners, in good times and bad, and experiencing what they're going through with them. And so having people there, state, USAID, Peace Corps, and others, is, back to one of the earlier questions, one of the key ways in which we are able to demonstrate and make true that we are there as partners, and that our interests are in working with them, across the regions, not just the Pacific Islands, but across Asia, as they seek to move forward on their own development pathways.
Great. Well, we'll stop there and not ask you any more questions, I think. But we got quite a few from the audience. So again, thank you to the audience for providing such great questions. And also thank you to you for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.
It was a pleasure.
Real pleasure to have you, and really, really interesting conversation. I hope we can continue it on and offline. But really, thanks for joining us. And thanks to the audience for joining us as well. We're going to do this kind of thing again, but I hope you found this useful. The video will be up on our website very soon. If you missed part or all of this, but presumably not this part, if you're hearing me say this, anyway, seriously, this will be available, and we hope you can go back and listen to the really interesting detail that Michael offered in there. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure.